Hi, I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, and I am insanely excited to tell you about my next mystery knit along called COWLTOPUS Mystery Knit Along. We get to dive into an ocean of fun with this mystery knit along. I'm a sucker for a good mystery knit along, and I know a lot of you are too. I've been collecting puns, so just beware as we get into this whole intro. So COWLTOPUS is fun because it is knit with less than 400 yards of DK weight yarn. That makes it a really accessible, fun, fast knit. I'm going to be teaching you lots of new techniques with COWLTOPUS. We'll be doing videos to show you things as we get to each clue. You're going to get to really make a splash with your stitches as you learn each new technique. I think it's important to say that your finished project is not going to have like 8 dangling tentacle legs, and it is not going to have an intarsia octopus on it, but it is going to be a cowl that you are going to absolutely love having in your wardrobe this winter. It's a brand new construction and shape for me, and I'm really excited for you to just sink your needles right into it. Okay, how this works is that you sign up by purchasing the pattern. When you purchase the pattern, you will get a PDF that includes the schedule of clues, the yarn that you need, how to prepare your yarn so you're ready to cast on, and gauge information. Then on each scheduled clue release date, you will get an updated PDF with the knitting instructions for that clue. One of the things I love about COWLTOPUS is since it's only 400 yards of yarn, it ends up being about 100 yards a clue. So it's really easy to keep up with this mystery knit along and finish it within the month. I think a little hint is that it's going to be a great gift knit and you might end up wanting to make more than one. So in this video, I want to go over with you what you're going to need to knit COWLTOPUS, and then how to work a gauge swatch and how to prepare your yarn. So let's jump right in with that. And then if you have more questions, you can certainly leave them below this video and I will answer them as soon as I see them. Okay. It is time to talk about what you are going to need to knit COWLTOPUS. I'm going to do kind of an overview and then I'm going to do a deep dive into color. So first what I want to talk about is the weight of yarn that you want to have, and then the needles that you're going to need and any extra accessories. This is a really easy knit along with not a lot of things needed for you to be able to jump in and knit it. So COWLTOPUS is knit with either 4 mini skeins or 1 full skein of DK weight yarn. That's a total of 196 yards, and then a contrast color of the exact same yardage. So you'll end up kind of with the main color and a contrast color, and you can choose to use mini skeins for both of those, or you can choose to use a single skein for both of those, or a single skein for one or the other. And I'll show you that a little bit more when we talk about color. The yarn that I used for my COWLTOPUS is from Susie at Fiber MacGyver. It's her merino DK weight yarn, and that yarn has about 246 yards to 100 grams. So as you're looking for yarn, you're going to want to look for a yarn that is a similar weight to that. That's a pretty standard weight for DK weight yarn, and I think you'll find that there are a lot of options out there. Now, since color for COWLTOPUS is a little bit intriguing and interesting, I did end up doing kits with Susie that are really, really fun, and I'll be using these to talk with you more about color. The other things that you're going to need besides your yarn are you're going to need some needles. And the pattern calls for a US size 7 needle that's 36 inches or longer, and a US size 6 needle, which is 1 size smaller than the US 7, that is about 20 or 22 inches long. If you have an interchangeable needle set, it is going to be perfect for this project. You're going to want to get gauge on that US size 7 needle. So if you don't get gauge on the US 7, you'll go up or down from there and then drop down with that second needle. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to gauge. You're going to need a pile of stitch markers. It will depend if you end up using stitch markers to break up repeats or not, how many stitch markers you're going to need. If you get a kit from Susie at Fiber McIver, there's some really fun octopus stitch markers that we included with those kits. The other thing that you're going to want is a scale. I use a digital scale. I'll give you a link to my favorite one below in the video comments. That is going to help you make sure that you're staying on track with yarn usage. You're going to especially want to have a scale if you are going stash diving and using bits of different yarns in your stash, because that's going to help you know when it is time to switch over to the next color. So once you have kind of gathered all of that, the next thing we really want to talk about is color, and that is really fun. So as I said, there are two main colors. There's two colors for COWLTOPUS. There's the main color and the contrast color. And you can choose to use all mini skeins for this project. And I'm just going to kind of lay them down right here underneath the camera so that you can see them. And if you look underneath the camera, you will see that I've got 8 mini skeins. This is my main color right here, and this is my contrast color. And do you see how each of these mini skeins are gradients and they go from dark to light and dark to light? You're going to end up working with them so that your main color and your contrast color always contrast each other. So you'll end up working with this main color skein, the darkest main color skein with the lightest contrast color skein. So if you are going stash diving, you want to make sure that every skein always contrasts with the skein that it's going to be going next to as you knit along. I'm going to show you this with a few other kits so that you really get an idea of how that contrast works. If I kind of line them up like this, I think that's another way to really easily see that contrast of colors with each other. One trick that I love to do is to desaturate when I am working with colors. So if I want to make sure that I have really good contrast with my colors, I'll take my phone camera and I'll take a picture and then I'll desaturate that picture. And you can very quickly see if the contrast between your colors disappears or not. What you'll notice here is that the contrast with the middle colors is not going to be as severe as on the ends, and that's okay. That's part of that kind of gradient happening. This kit right here, I absolutely adore. This is actually the kit that I knit my sample in, and it is called, what is it called again? It's called the Giant Pacific Octopus. I love oranges and blues together so much. I think they really, really pop. So that's one way of working with COWLTOPUS, is to use 2 sets of 4 gradients, making sure that your contrast color and your main color contrast from each other. Another important thing to say that I forgot to say until right this minute is you will notice as you look under the camera that the main color is solid and my contrast color is speckled. That is because if my main color and my contrast color were both speckled, your COWLTOPUS would end up being just kind of a little bit too crazy, like a crazy octopus. And we don't want that. We want an octopus that doesn't, I mean, it can scream party, but it shouldn't like scream party. So you want to make sure that either your main color or your contrast color is not as speckled, not as hand-dyed as the other one. And what I did with all of the kits that Susie and I built is the main color is a solid gradient or a solid full skein, and then the contrast color is the speckle. So that's what you want to make sure that you do as if you are stash diving. But if you're working from a kit, we have figured that out for you. Here's an example of another kit. This one's really great. It's called Mimic. We had such a good time learning about octopuses as we were naming them. And Mimic uses a solid main color skein and then 4 gradient mini skeins for the contrast color. And so this way, this is a full DK weight skein. It's got 246 yards on it. This right here is 196 yards. That is what you need total. So you'll end up having a little bit left over of the main color, which is great. You'll be able to use that for doing your gauge swatch and playing around in another project. So this is another way that you could look at color. You could also go opposite, where you have 4 solid gradient skeins for your main color and then a solid fun skein for your contrast color. That is absolutely fine too. The other thing that you could do is have another skein. I didn't grab one here, but I'm trying to think, let's pretend that this is a full skein. You could just do your main color in a solid and your contrast color in a full skein and play with those together, and that will work as well. The most important thing, as I said, is that they contrast with each other and that they aren't both too wild. You want to have one be just a little bit more subdued, and that's so the stitches can really pop. When your yarn has too much of a party, sometimes details can get lost, and we don't want our details to get lost, do we? So that was a bit about color. Please do ask any questions if you're confused with any part of that or you want to hear any more. I want to show you the other things that are in the kits that Susie and I put together. We did kits in 8 different colorways. They're all absolutely glorious. I've knit one in the giant octopus. I believe I'm going to do another one. I'm not sure if I'm doing it in the Mimic or there was another colorway I'm kind of obsessed with. So I'll be doing more of them. I think I'm going to knit one along with you, which I haven't done in a mystery knit along in the last few years, and I think that would be really fun. So we got 2 stickers for you. I was working on a sticker with our COWLTOPUS logo because I thought she was just like so cute. And so we had a sticker made up of that. And then I found this sticker from Shelly Can that said "Get Crackin'," and that's like basically our motto with this whole mystery knit along. So I had to get that for y'all as well. And then we found the cutest octopus needle end stoppers, which with this project are going to come in very handy. It's really helpful when you put your project down to put needle end stoppers on so your stitches don't come flying off of your needles. And then I've got 2 very fun stitch markers for you. I've got a little tentacle stitch marker with suckers on it because I'm a sucker for a good MCAL. And then we worked with Jillian at Wee Ones again this year to make the world's most adorable little octopus stitch markers. And you can see that Jillian managed to get 8 legs onto those octopuses. So those come in 4 different colors. And if you get more than one kit from Susie, she'll make sure that you get one of different colors so you don't have duplicate stitch markers. So that's everything else that's coming in that kit. And certainly if you are stitch diving, I'm sure you'll have very fun stitch markers and needle stoppers at home to play with. So once you've gathered all of your materials, I have a feeling people will be gathering materials for more than one mystery knit along, then the next thing to do is to prepare your yarn, and let's talk about how to do that next. Okay, once you've chosen your yarn or gotten your kit in the mail, it is time to wind it up to get yourself ready to go. For COWLTOPUS, I made magic balls. And if you've never made a magic ball before, I have a blog post on how to make them and then a video on how to do a magic knot. So I'm not going to go over that right now with you. I'll link to that below. But what you want to do is start with your main color. And if you're working with a single skein of yarn, you can just wind that into a ball. But if you're working with 4 mini skeins, you are going to want to wind them from MC4, which is the lightest color, to to MC1, which is the darkest color, with MC4 on the inside of your ball and MC1 on the outside of your ball. And that is because you're going to be working from the outside of your ball, starting with MC1, which is main color 1. So you want to prep your ball with all of your 4 main colors together and then set that aside. One thing that you will see on page 3 of the pattern is before you tie MC3 to MC2, if you are working the magic knot, you're going to want to cut off about a 12-inch length and set that aside somewhere where you can find it later, like maybe make a note on your Ravelry page, put a note in the Ravelry forums, somewhere so you remember where you put it, and you'll be using that when we finish the mystery. Just there's one spot that needs a little bit of that color to tidy things up a little bit, so you have to trust me on that one. Don't forget where you put it, promise. If you are working with the solid skein, if one big skein, don't worry about it. You'll have enough left over. You don't have to cut any and hide it. So that is getting you ready for the main color. Another thing I know I need to mention is that some of you don't love magic knots and don't trust them. So if you don't trust magic knots, don't tie a magic knot in between each skein. Just leave them loose, wrap your yarn into a ball, and then when you get to about 6 inches before the end of that color, you'll just leave that tail dangling, add in your next color, and weave those ends in at the end. So once you have wound your main color, you'll put that aside, and then you will wind your contrast color the same way. You might play around and decide what your favorite gradient is from light to dark, knowing that the lightest color, which is CC1, should be on the outside, and the darkest color, CC4, should be on the inside. And that is because you are going to start working with CC1 on the outside of the ball because it contrasts with the MC1 the best. So you're basically winding this ball opposite than you did your last ball. And here's a ball right here that I have wound with 3 of the 4 minis on it, just so you can see what that magic ball looks like. You do not need to set any of these strands beside. You can just go ahead and wind them and tie them together. So that's what you need to do to prepare your yarn. Obviously, if you're working with a solid color for your contrasting color, you're just going to wind that into a ball. The next thing we want to talk about quickly is gauge, and then you can go off and running and chat in the forums and show everybody the yarn that you're working with. Okay, it's time to work gauge. Pretty important to work gauge for a mystery knit along, especially if you are working with a kit, because you want to get the most out of your yarn. So if you are working from a kit that has a gradient for the main color, you're going to want to use your MC4, which is on the inside of your ball, for working your gauge swatch. You can just reach in and find the end. If you're working with a solid color, you'll just work with your MC, and then you want to work with needle A, which is the bigger size needle. If you know you knit tightly, I would start your gauge swatch 1 needle size up. And if you know you knit loosely like I do, I would start your gauge swatch with 1 needle size down. And I suggest you cast on about 24 stitches and knit a good 3 or 4 inches to get a nice substantial swatch. You're gonna work this swatch in stockinette stitch, which means you're gonna knit right side rows and purl wrong side rows. It's a pretty big hint for a mystery knit along that I'm having you work your gauge swatch flat. That kind of tells you something that I don't want to give too much away right there. So after you have worked your swatch, you're going to want to block it lightly, which means you're going to want to put it onto some scrap yarn or a piece of stitch saver and then wet it in some warm water, let it really soak up that water, and then lay it down flat and let it dry. Once it is completely dry, one time I made a mistake and I measured a swatch for a mystery knit along before it was dry and the gauge just went like all wonky. Make sure your swatch is totally dry. Then kind of take it and bat it around like a kitten for a little bit, just letting all of those stitches like even out and smooth out. And then you're gonna lay it down and put a ruler over it, and then go ahead and count your stitches. Now, I want to make sure I tell this to you right, because it would be horrible if I told you the wrong gauge in a tutorial video. The gauge for COWLTOPUS is 18 stitches by 26 rows in stockinette stitch, lightly blocked. I'll tell you that stitch gauge matters more than row gauge for this. I wouldn't worry about row gauge. Just make sure that you get stitch gauge. And what you will do is go ahead and count your stitches, looking at each stitch going across the row. And this is 2 inches right here. So I want to have 9 stitches going across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I've got 10 and a little bit. So that means that this gauge swatch is not on, and I'm going to need to, because I have too many stitches, go up a needle size and work another gauge swatch. I kind of did this on purpose because I knit my COWLTOPUS on a metal COWGOO interchangeable needle on a US size 6, because remember I said I knit loosely. And then I knit my gauge swatch on these wood needles. And I know that I knit more loosely on metal needles than I do on wood needles. So I thought it would be fun kind of learning moment to show you what happens when you switch needle type. So the lesson here is to knit your gauge swatch with the needle that you are going to knit your COWLTOPUS with. Don't be tempted to just like grab some other needle to do your gauge swatch. Make sure that you use the same one, because your gauge will be different depending on the material. And I know some of you who've been knitting for a while, that is nothing new to you, but some of you who are new to this knitting world, and especially new to a mystery knit along, this is a pretty important lesson to be learned. So once you have your gauge, if you are working with those mini skeins, you're going to end up wanting to unravel your gauge swatch and get the kink out of it by like wetting it or steaming it and letting it dry, because you're going to want to use all of that yarn for your mystery knit along. So do not cut it. If you are working with a full 246 yard skein, since you only need that 196 yards, you've got enough extra that you can put your gauge swatches to the side and not worry about it so much. I have threads set up in Ravelry and Facebook groups, so if you have any question as you are working on gauge, please do ask. We are so happy to help you have success with this knit. One of the things I absolutely adore about mystery knit-alongs is the community that gets built and the friendships that are forged. We have very active Ravelry and Facebook groups. We have a no knitter left behind policy. So if you get lost at sea in your stitches, if you need help, just shout out. We'll be there to navigate you back on track. Our community will not let you get tied down in the small stuff. So who's ready to make waves with me? I have a slew of octopus puns to share with you between now and October 3rd, when the first clue launches. Please share octopuses and octopi puns with me. I've got a great reading and watching list for us. So if you want to read any books about octopi, watch any movies, let's do that together. I'm so excited to get cracking with you.